The Trump administration offers an initial 9 U.S. universities a compact on higher education, promising access to federal funding in exchange for commitments on admissions, campus speech, grade inflation, tuition, and more. Is this common sense college reform, an overreach by Uncle Sam, or maybe some of both?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, editorial board member Colin Levy and columnist Kim Strassel. The Trump administration's clashes with Harvard, Columbia, George Mason University, and other schools have prompted headlines and sometimes lawsuits. But now the government seems to be broadening its lens. Last week, sending a letter to 9 schools that the White House sees as potential partners, including Dartmouth, the University of Southern California, MIT, the University of Texas at Austin, and the University of Virginia. Attached was a document titled Compact for Academic Excellence in Higher Education, seeking a broad range of commitments from these schools. Colin, maybe a place to start is to put a pin in the question of the federal government's role and power here and just go through some of the bullet points in this 10-point list from the Trump administration. If I can group them a little bit, I mean, my first would be on admissions. So there's a headline, Equality in Admissions, talking about what sounds to me like enforcing the law and the constitutional decision from the Supreme Court in that Harvard case a couple of years ago. I mean, there are some points about saying all these schools must require undergrad applicants to take a standardized test like the SAT or the ACT. There's this line, university admissions decisions shall be based upon and evaluated against objective criteria published on the university's website. I don't know how many schools do that right now. And then a similar bullet point, non-discrimination in faculty and administrative hiring. Again, Colin, to my eye, that was already the law.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right, Kyle. I mean, I think it's important to look through each of these elements individually because some of them, as you say, are sort of normal and sensible, and others are a little bit more bizarre and coercive. The compact starts out with saying that the discriminatory admissions processes violate civil rights law and the Constitution, and therefore the government won't tolerate any kind of preferential treatment in admissions, and that all admissions decisions and hiring need to be evaluated based on objective criteria. And as you say, that was already covered by the Supreme Court decision in Students for Fair Admissions, and it's sort of generally been extended in the thought process to hiring. So, we already know that universities can't race preferences, up with meritocracy. And so I think that's probably pretty innocuous. The compact then also, in that same category of things that are relatively normal, the compact gets into the fact that, colleges should be a marketplace of ideas and civil discourse. I think that's great too. We're all for free speech on campus and for lots of, civil debate. I think that should be fairly unobjectionable at this point. So, I thought that section was maybe interesting in one part where it says that freedom to debate requires conditions of civility, and civility includes protections against institutional punishment or individual harassment for one's views. I thought that was interesting because it seems to say that schools are expected to make efforts to prevent, a heckler's veto or violence or intimidation of people voicing unpopular views on subjects. I think that's important. I think that's somewhere where universities can change things around the edges a little bit to make sure that students aren't actually intimidated as they have been. I mean, really genuinely intimidated, I think, in recent decades of speaking in ways that they're, that their colleagues, that their fellow students might not like, or even maybe more importantly, that their professors may not like. I think if you'd talk to students, a few years ago on campus, they would say they would be intimidated about, writing their views on certain subjects for fear that the professors might not like that. And on that same note, the compact lifts up institutional neutrality, like the Chicago principles, the idea that schools shouldn't be getting in the middle of major geopolitical issues. So I think those things are all, relatively straightforward and good aspects of the compact.
On the point about speech, student speech, so one of this, the section that Colin is discussing is under the headline Marketplace of Ideas and Civil Discourse. It says that these colleges will agree not to knowingly permit actions that delay or disrupt class instruction or disrupt libraries or other traditional study locations, not to allow demonstrators to heckle or accost individual students or groups of students. From the standpoint of the university administration, the president's office, that to me seems like a big no-brainer. Not to allow demonstrators to be banging drums and yelling in the library while there are other students trying to study for their finals. The point about institutional neutrality is an interesting one, Kim, because I guess I take that to mean that the university does not take positions on issues, which has been, I mean, there's been a lot of pressure for that in recent years. And I think it would be a step forward if these institutions, if the University of Texas at Austin, for example, said, we don't have a position on enhanced Obamacare subsidies or the war in Gaza or any of these issues that the demonstrators are trying to pressure them to take a stance on. On the other hand, I do wonder about some of the language in this compact. So here's a line: "This requires policies that all university employees, in their capacity as university representatives, will abstain from actions or speech relating to societal and political events." And I do wonder about that, if that would apply to professors, if that would impinge perhaps on academic freedom. I mean, I'm imagining a economist who's teaching a class on healthcare economics, for example, and there you might have an instance where a student raises their hands and says, "What about the incentives created by these enhanced Obamacare subsidies?" I do wonder if there is a risk here of micromanaging some of those kinds of conversations, academic conversations, which I guess is not to dissent, Kim, from the point that as institutions and as departments, institutional neutrality seems like a pretty good idea.
Yeah. And look, I think we should all like institutional neutrality. And a lot of this is going to come down to the details. And this compact, I think, is a bit vague in important ways. You just brought up, I can bring up another example. I mean, there are a great number of professors, whether in the economics world, the legal world, the politics world, who spend a lot of time writing op-eds, for instance, for newspapers like ours, or going on TV to give their opinion on a particular issue or case that came along. Where are the lines in that? But the institutional neutrality, this is very pointed as well, because remember, and as you just noted, Kyle, a lot of the groups, for instance, that camped out or took over Columbia University, their stated goal was to get the universities to condemn Israel, to divest from Israel, to take an institutional position. And this is trying to temper some of the rush that you have seen among some schools to do that. Look, what I like about the speech element of this overall is more what Colin was talking about, that, for forever, for most of the university's existence in this country, including the universities that they were based on, going back into, in England and elsewhere, the Western cultural tradition is that universities are meant to be these vibrant marketplaces for ideas. And we have lost that. And you've seen some on the right trying to change that over the years. It's been very slow and painful. University of Arizona, for instance, has a Center for American Institutions. The University of Texas has a School for Civic Leadership. These are sometimes, though, outposts on the campus, a little bit ghettoized. They bring in their own speakers. They sort of operate in their own space. Whereas a lot of these schools, you still have much greater difficulty having speakers come in with conservative views who speak to the entire campus. Some universities have been changing that a little bit better under better leadership. I look, for instance, to the public universities in Florida, where former Senator Ben Sasse is now making a lot of steps to sort of change that culture. But to the extent that this compact is really pushing on this and about the entire outlook of a university, its purpose and its role in simply being a place where everyone, where all ideas are welcome and where you are not shunned for having those or heckled for having those, I think is just such an important thing that we do need to try to restore.
Then going past this question of campus speech, Colin, there are other elements of this proposed compact that get into more the business of being a university. One of them is on grade inflation. So here's a line: signatories acknowledge that a grade must not be inflated or deflated for any non-academic reason, but only rigorously reflect the demonstrated mastery of a subject. And I mean, I take the point that grade inflation is a problem. It has been a problem for a long, long time, but that seems like a difficult thing for a compact with the federal government to try to police. I mean, there are some suggestions here that these colleges, if they agree to this, would have to publish grade distributions, for example, and then explain if there are any variations from year to year. But I wonder if colleges really want to put themselves under the thumb of the federal government with respect to the grading systems that they use.
I totally agree, Kyle. I think things really get a bit messy when the administration starts talking about how these signatories have to commit to grade integrity and the use of defensible standards. I mean, what exactly is a defensible standard? I mean, I don't know how the Justice Department imagines that it's going to substantiate whether or not a student deserved a certain grade. There is inevitably, especially in certain kinds of classes, there is some subjective judgment. That's not always a bad thing. The compact says that they're going to have to use public accountability mechanisms like grade distribution dashboards with multi-year trend lines so that everyone can see their student outcomes. But I think this is really a double-edged sword, because if on the one hand you have a class that shows that all of the students are getting A's, is that evidence that there's grade inflation, and a failure of meritocracy? Or if you have, a situation where you've got a strict professor and they're giving a few A's but giving a lot of B's and C's, does that mean that the school's doing a great job fighting grade inflation? Or does it mean that the professor's, failing to properly teach students the fundamentals that they're supposed to be getting from a college education? You're looking across this whole list of what grades kids are getting. Do you see a professor who's giving a lot of C's as a professor that's failing, or a professor that's succeeding because, they're strictly applying the rules against grade inflation? I don't think we really want to get into a world where there's some kind of predetermined bell curve in which, in order to comply with the federal government's wishes, that you've got to have, 4 C's, 4 B's, 3 A minuses and 2 A's in order for the school to pass muster. That just seems like a ridiculous errand to me.
Then getting even more business-like, Kim, one of these points from the Trump administration is that the universities would not exceed more than 15% of international students. The Journal has a story saying that none of these 9 colleges, for the record, are currently over that cap, according to federal data. And then some points under a heading of financial responsibility. Signatories to this compact commit to freezing the effective tuition rates charged to American students for the next 5 years. In addition to that, any university with an endowment exceeding $2 million per undergraduate student will not charge tuition for admitted students pursuing hard science programs. And again, I mean, that may be a great policy for one of these universities to undertake. Purdue University, under the leadership of Mitch Daniels, did a tuition freeze for multi-years, and I think that was probably good for the state and good for Purdue and attracting students, getting some notice, and B, showing that kind of thing is possible if you take a real hard look at the bottom line and what is the value we are getting for all these big construction projects and all these expansions of departments that often schools are doing. But again, Kim, I mean, I have a hard time thinking that any of these university presidents really want to put themselves in a position where the bottom line of their business as a institution is being dictated by Uncle Sam.
Yeah, these provisions, both the tuition freeze and then this cap on international students, strike me as having many of the same problems as Colin's example here of grade inflation, which is that in and of themselves, each of them are laudable goals, right? Who of us does not wish that there was less grade inflation? Of course, we all wish that tuition was far more sensible, especially those of us with kids in college. And I think that there is some real questions to be had about the number of international students, which go beyond just pure numbers. But the problem, as always, is when the federal government is setting hard freezes, hard caps, specific numbers, you usually end up with problems, in part because it's a one size fits all, and every one of these universities is a very different scenario, and it doesn't allow for those differing circumstances. Sometimes when you have those kind of caps and freezes, you end up getting unintended consequences as well too, where universities end up changing things around in order to simply hit the cap. And then there are other things that come along that nobody was expecting that are a problem themselves. Look, there's probably far better ways that you could have done this. I mean, for instance, if you're worried about tuition, it might have been more sensible to have simply demanded some more radical transparency about how universities are spending their money and why tuition is what it is. How much of the money is going to huge, massive, bloated bureaucracy and graduate students, for instance, these sort of ballooning departments? How much of it is going to departments that nobody's registered for? Sort of more information for taxpayers and potential parents of students that are going to get a better sense of what exact rationale there is for these massive tuition increases that keep going up. Similarly, look, I mean, this point about international students, I mean, I'm a big believer in immigration, et cetera, but this is all tied up in a lot more complicated discussion about university financing overall, those bureaucracies, tuition, admissions, and how foreign students end up being welcome and taken in great numbers, in part because they pay full freight for their tuition. And you can certainly understand the financial rationale for universities doing that, although I think the country needs to be having a bigger discussion, not about caps and numbers, but about some of these decisions by universities. We just had a really powerful op-ed not long ago by former Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher about looking at the number of Chinese nationals enrolled in American universities, especially those studying technology. We want to invite a lot of people to our universities. We also have to be honest that some countries are adversaries and that their citizens, while they are captives to those authoritarian regimes, they are captives of those authoritarian regimes. And if we're educating them here and sending them back, what are they being asked to do with their knowledge back home? So I think there's some bigger discussions to be had about that. But these sort of hard and fast rules that they tried to put forward in this compact are not really the way to get into those discussions or enforce a better system.
Then we get to that point on enforcement, the or else, which is the 10th bullet point in this document. Colin, it says that the colleges would have to hire some kind of auditors to go through the agreement and make sure that the colleges are in compliance with it. But then the ultimate decision making, it sounds like, is subject to review by the Department of Justice. And the penalties include refunding any money that was coming from federal taxpayers to the university during the year of the violation. And then any private contributions to the university during the years in which such violation occurred shall be returned to the grantor upon the request of the grantor. And that is a pretty big weapon to hand off to the Justice Department. Colin, I mean, what do you make of this? Do you think that colleges should or would be willing to give the federal government that kind of leverage? It is notable that of these 9 schools, as far as I know, none of them have so far accepted. They've been pretty quiet about their analysis of this document so far. There's one statement from the chairman of the University of Texas System Board of Regents. He says, we enthusiastically look forward to engaging with university officials and reviewing the compact immediately, unquote, which is maybe the least that the head of the University of Texas Regents can say here, given the politics of that state, Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I think that last part that you mentioned about the possibility of asking schools to return to private donors the money that was given during this particular period, I mean, just from a logistical, administrative standpoint, sounds like an absolute nightmare. I mean, also, what are you going to do with the fact that many of people are, claiming tax? I mean, the tax implications of this really are sort of mind-boggling in terms of what it would require of schools, what it would require for clawing back taxes for donations. I mean, anyway, the mind sort of reels on that one. On the broader question of what the schools should do and how they're going to handle it, of course, we saw from most of the schools that they all just kind of said, well, we got it. Thanks, thanks for sending that along, and we're reviewing it. I think at the end of the day, it'll be easier for some schools to accept than others. Some schools will probably instinctively feel like they were already on board with most of this program. So accepting this, supposedly privileged status that signing the compact conveys will be like a no-brainer for them. There are others that, because of alumni views or because of the feedback from the faculty or from the student body or any number of other things, will find that accepting the compact will create a bunch of internal disagreements that they'll have to manage. And I think that's probably going to go into part of their consideration. One of the things that was interesting to me was that when the administration sent out the compact last week, it was the schools that didn't receive the compact that was offering the extra access to federal funds that really came out swinging against it. Saying that the compact would force them to, force these other schools to bow to the Trump administration's priorities on campus and infringe on academic freedom. Some really came out and said this is a tool of intimidation that was intended to force colleges into making changes, out of fear of losing federal funding. Interesting there that the voices were coming from the ones who were not about to get all of this preferential treatment.
But they may be worrying about what comes next. And Kim, to be honest, I guess I'm a little worried about that as well. To take the pin out of the thing that we pinned at the beginning, the role of the federal government here. If the president of the United States at his whim can send out this kind of compact and make these kinds of demands on schools, you have to put yourself in the situation where the shoe is on the other foot. I mean, I think that what is in this compact is directionally right in terms of reforms that would be very useful at a lot of these schools. I don't think that the administration and Washington are powerless over the problems that exist in American higher ed. I think there's a lot that they could do, including by reforming the federal student loan program, if there was the will in Congress that could be mustered to do that. But if this is the kind of compact is the way that the Washington is going to approach these schools, then the next compact, this one is anti-DEI. The next compact from the next administration must be that we require you to use DEI, and please sign the President Newsom compact or the President AOC compact. It may have a bullet point about how climate science is treated on these campuses. And Kim, I worry it's just in line with the trend of not being content to let the little platoons of civil society exist, and some of them are wrong and very wrong, but to try to nationalize all of these issues and send everything up to Washington where all the decisions get made.
And I see that, and that worry is legitimate, and that's why it's important to go through each of these provisions and judge them on their different merits and push back on the ones that are overkill. Although I have a little bit of a different view on the worry in that that's already been happening. I mean, look, it's always been the deal that if you're going to take federal money and you're an institution of higher learning, there are strings. And obviously the most famous of those is Title IX, which we've all heard about so much in recent years, but which makes it illegal for educational institutions receiving federal funds to exclude or otherwise discriminate against individuals based on sex, which was, of course, a provision that was put in place to help women in college. It's now been used in different ways. But, this has been being used by the Obama and the Biden administrations for a long time to try to coerce schools to follow their cultural agenda, in particular on DEI, race, gender. We also saw the weaponization of sexual harassment allegations that was very much fomented by the prior administrations. The only difference really being that when the Obama team and the Biden team were demanding these things, they were largely greeted with open arms by all these university administrations because it happened to align with the sort of progressive and a more left-wing view that began to permeate a lot of the tops of these universities. So now you're seeing it from the other side. I guess I would say that, they did it first. Now the Trump administration is saying, okay, we want to talk about strings that are attached to federal funding. Here's the ones that we're going to do. And again, I think we need to be very careful and critical when some of those go too far. At the same time, and I have a little bit more of a, I'm an old-fashioned, limited, conservative, small government person's view on this too. If you don't like it, there's also an answer, which is that you can be Hillsdale College and not take any federal money. And a lot of universities do that because they don't want the federal government nitpicking and breathing down their neck. So it's not as if there are no options here. And I do appreciate that we now have a situation where great amounts of money are tied up in higher education research, in particular for vital medical and scientific advancements. But I think that there needs to be a larger sorting out here about what those lines are between the federal government and private institutions, and whether or not those lines wouldn't be better if we separated them more generally.
Thank you, Kim and Colin. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.